Happiness in the law is about using research on happiness, about people's well-being, and applying it to law and to public policy. The law can have an enormous influence on how happy people are and how good their lives are. Everything from whether we have additional health and safety protections, because a person's health is incredibly important to their happiness and to their quality of life, to how we treat people who are in prison, because that can affect both how happy people are in prison and then even more importantly, how happy they are and how good their lives are when they get out of prison, to things like whether we encourage people to move into the suburbs and commute long distances, or whether we provide tax incentives or other policies to encourage people to live in the cities near where they work, because we've learned that commuting a long distance can also affect someone's happiness greatly. One important finding that we discuss in Happiness in the Law is that people don't respond to prison the way that we would think that they would. We have this assumption in American law that 20 years in prison is twice as bad as 10 years. 10 years in prison is twice as bad as 5 years. And it turns out that that's not true at all, actually. One reason it's not true is that people adapt to being in prison. They get used to it. They form social groups in prison. And so subsequent years in prison are less bad than the first few years were. So as you spend more time in prison, it gets easier for you. The other reason is that if you're in prison for almost any length of time, it really makes your life outside of prison a lot worse. It's harder to find a job after you've been in prison, which has very serious effects on your happiness. It's harder to form close social relationships or get married, which has serious effects on happiness. People also contract diseases, and it's bad for your health to be in prison. So if you serve 10 years in prison and then you get out, those years outside of prison aren't so good either. So one of the important implications of our work in Happiness in the Law is that we are sentencing people in some cases to much too long periods of time in prison, and those lengthy prison terms aren't doing us a lot of good. In Happiness in the Law, we propose that when the government is deciding on whether or not to pass a law or whether or not to enact a certain public policy, it try to measure the effects of that law or policy in happiness terms rather than in monetary terms. Or by some other metric. So the government should explicitly ask, if we implement this policy, on the whole, will it make people happier and better off, or will it make them less happy? And psychologists and economists have provided a veritable trove of useful research that helps us get at that question. We now know the effects of lots of different legal changes or policy changes on people's happiness. And so if government is thinking about a new law or a new public policy, it can look to that research to determine what the likely effects of the law or policy will be. So Happiness in the Law suggests a couple of different important policy conclusions. One of them is that we should be trying to shorten prison terms and also trying to make people's lives better off once they get out of prison. This is not just so that convicted criminals suffer less and are made less unhappy. It's also because if their lives are better outside of prison, they have less of a reason to commit another crime and end up in prison, more of a reason to try to remain out of prison. A second implication is that we should probably be investing much more heavily in laws and policies that protect people's health and safety. Health and safety have an enormous effect on happiness, and relatively small amounts of money, if they're spread across large populations, do not have such a large effect on happiness. So if 1,000 people were each asked to pay $10, and that could save some other person from becoming depressed or from contracting a disease or something like that, that would be very positive for happiness, and that's the kind of investment that a society should be making. In writing Happiness in the Law, we're hoping certainly that policymakers will take notice. We hope that people in government will think that happiness is a useful way to think about whether a law is beneficial or not beneficial, and that they'll try to analyze new laws or new policies by looking at their happiness effects. We also hope that it will influence the public, that people will read this and they'll think about ways in which they can improve their own lives and make themselves happier, the ways in which they react to laws and public policy, both in positive and in negative ways, and that it will bring to the forefront the fact that one's happiness or one's well-being is very important to our lives and that we can do a lot to influence it.